Mega Man. Now there's a series I've been meaning to cover for quite some time now. If you know me in any way, then there's a good chance that you're aware that I happen to be a pretty big Mega Man fan. I wouldn't consider it to be my favorite video game franchise or even put it in my top 5, but it is definitely a series I enjoy a ton. Most Mega Man games are pretty short, but there are a buttload of Mega Man games, so I feel like these are videos I could turn out pretty quickly, while also working on the larger projects like Pokemon and Megami Tensei on the side. But to start this off, I believe there is no better place to begin with than the original Mega Man on the NES. Released by Capcom in Japan on December 17th, 1987, with a Western release following suit later that month on the 29th, the original Mega Man, or Rockman as it is known in Japan, was infamously not that huge of a hit. No, the game that really launched Mega Man into the mainstream was Mega Man 2, released a year later, leaving out this first game as a bit of an odd duck. It's not as completely forgotten as something like Street Fighter 1, but it's also definitely not one of the more talked about or well-beloved titles in the series. I first played the original Mega Man, as well as the following 5 NES games, on the Mega Man Legacy collection for the 3DS. Since then, I went on to play these 6 games in plenty of formats, including the Switch Legacy collection, the Japanese-only PS1 releases, and of course the original NES versions, which is what I'll be playing today. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to finally get this journey started. Mega Man for the NES. Insert obligatory, wow, the American box art is so bad comment here. But okay, to be fair, it's kinda hard to look at the first Mega Man from a Western perspective without thinking of this cover. Yes, it is terrible. I didn't need to tell you that for us to arrive at that conclusion, but god damn it, for as shitty as it is also really funny. There's a reason this cover is so well remembered. People are just embarrassed to admit that they love it. Same, but to a lesser extent goes to the PAL box art. I don't know why, but this artwork of Dr. Wily just always cracked me up. And then there's also the Japanese cover. Yeah, whatever, it looks fine. This looks less like an action game and more like a Full House sitcom. But I still love how all 3 of these covers are so radically different. Like, how did this even happen? Maybe the story will give us more insight into that. As you'd expect, the plot of Mega Man 1 is contained entirely within its instruction manual. Our tale centers around 2 longtime rivals known as Dr. Thomas Light and Dr. Albert W. Wiley, 2 scientists researching the fields of robotics. Ever since they met in college, Dr. Wily was always behind Dr. Light's shadow. Light would eventually go on to create 8 humanoid robots meant to help mankind. 6 of these were designed for specific labular purposes, and are what we now know as Robot Masters, while the other 2, Rock and Roll, were there to assist Dr. Light in his lab, while also hopefully keeping him less lonely. Due to the success of Dr. Light, Wily grew jealous and swore to take his revenge. He proceeded to hack the 6 Robot Masters, turning the once peaceful robots into violent killing machines. And so, with the Robot Masters at his disposal, Wily set to wreak havoc and rule over mankind. What an absolute drama queen. However, when all seemed lost, Rock, one of Light's assistant robots, asked the Doctor to modify him with fighting capabilities so that he could stop the corrupted Robot Masters as well as Dr. Wily once and for all. And so Dr. Light reluctantly agrees, turning Rock into the super fighting robot himself, Mega Man. And that's the premise. At least the premise we know nowadays. The original English instruction manual kinda just made a bunch of bullcrap up. Mega Man, the chosen defender of the human race, for he dares to single-handedly penetrate Monsteropolis' 7 separate societies to stop the rapid expansion of strange misrepresentations of humans. Well, this sure is getting political. Will you and Mega Man penetrate the 7 separate societies of Dr. Wright and preserve the human race? You're in control. Now this is what you call pick fiction, ladies and gentlemen. But alright, all jokes aside, the premise I described to you earlier is what's nowadays accepted into the serious canon. No Monsteropolis in sight. On its own, I think it's a solid setup. I've always been a bit of a sucker for evil scientist villains, and Dr. Wily is a pretty great one. That mustache is just mwah. The story is far from anything mind-blowing. Roll is a character that's just kinda there for no reason. Barely anything has any form of context whatsoever. And again, all of that is just from outside material. The game itself just drops you right into the heat of things. But as an origin story, it more than gets the job done. And leaves plenty of room to be expanded upon in the future. And oh boy did it ever get expanded on. But that's not today's topic now, is it? On to the game itself then. We start off in a pure black title screen, supporting no accompanying music whatsoever. The Japanese version is a bit better as we actually get to see Mega Man, or I guess technically Rockman, but it is also just a still image with no music. Mega Man was a relatively early NES game, and as such, its visuals are not particularly great. The standouts here are easily the character and enemy sprites. They all have very clear and distinct outlines, making it easy to always track their location, whereas with stuff like Ninja Gaiden and Castlevania, it can be pretty easy to get lost in the background. And while all of Mega Man sprites are very simple, they are also very recognizable, where the visuals more so suffer is with the environment design. Most of the time you're just going to be walking through barren wastelands, with backgrounds compromised of just a single color, while some stages like Lekmans and Icemans do definitely stand out. Others such as Gotmans, Bombmans, and Cotmans all look pretty derivative of each other. So while the graphics of Mega Man may not be very impressive, I do think its art style is one that helps the game visually age far better than most others on the system. The part that's definitely the most rough would probably be the slowdown. When a lot of enemies and projectiles are on screen, the game is oft to lag. I'd say that the slowdown is just uncommon enough to the point where I'd personally won't consider it an issue, but when it does happen, I'm never left particularly enthralled. As we press start, instead of being dropped right into an opening level of sorts, we are instead given a stage select screen, showing us all of the defected Robot Masters. This here is one of the most iconic features of the Mega Man series, being able to tackle the first half of the game in whichever order you please. Yes, you can begin your journey with any which one of these stages, lending the game more replay value. However, being able to start with any stage you want doesn't necessarily mean you should start with any stage you want. Let's put a pin on that for now, as we head over into the gameplay. Mega Man's levels are all structured pretty simply. They are all linear platforming challenges that culminate with a boss battle. All of the stages only have 2 checkpoints, one halfway through the stage and another right before the boss. By default you have 2 extra lives. If you run out, it's game over. You have to start the whole level from the beginning. As luck would have it, the game has unlimited continues, meaning you won't have to worry about replaying stages once you've finished them, though it should also be noted that the game doesn't have any save or password system, meaning that without save states, you would have to finish it all in a single sitting. However, the game itself is thankfully very short, so even if you somehow don't have access to save states, then I still wouldn't say it's too big of a deal breaker. After beating a Robot Master, Mega Man will be awarded a special weapon based on said boss, which you can switch to at any time in the pause menu, and most of them change Mega Man's color, which I always found to be a nice touch. The special weapons often have their advantages compared to the regular Buster shots, but the caveat here is that they all have limited ammo, which means you won't be able to rely on them too much. Even after dying, your special ammo capacity remains unchanged. However, they thankfully will be fully refilled after a game over, which actually means there are some situations where it's advantageous to get a game over, funnily enough. The special weapons can often be used outside of combat in order to reach secret areas, and each of them have their own unique damage affinities, most notable when talking about the bosses, as they all have weaknesses to certain weapons that, when used on them, will give you a massive advantage in the battle. Mega Man himself supports an incredibly simple and intuitive moveset. Pressing A makes him jump, and pressing B makes him shoot. Starting out, that's all you've got. And while that may not seem like much, well, because it really isn't much, you'll soon come to realize just how versatile this toolset is. Jumping and shooting both feel really good. Mega Man's jump is fast and highly controllable, and while you can only shoot forward and only have 3 shots on screen at a time, set shots are fast, precise, and dish out pretty solid damage. But while the jumping and shooting both feel on point, I would hesitate to say that Mega Man 1 has particularly good play control, because believe it or not, the thing that gets in the way of that is the standard movement. Mega Man has this really weird momentum to him. He drops off platforms like a brick, and is off to turn around pretty slowly. It's pretty hard to describe, but the movement here is just way too slippery and doesn't feel all too great. It's fine when just dealing with enemies and the such, but when it's time for some precise platforming, things can get pretty nerve-wracking. One part I do definitely have to compliment Mega Man 1 on is the enemy variety. It is very solid. There are quite a surprising amount of them here, and they all look pretty great while being unique from one another, with some of my favorite being the iconic Mets, who hide behind covers and only come out to kill you, and the Sniper Joe, who are kinda similar to that, but provide a far more engaging battle. Think of them as the Hammer Brothers of Mega Man, even though there are only 3 of them in the whole game. Of course, not all of the enemies are winners. These watchers in a Lackman stage are seriously just irritating with how spammed they are, and the big guys are the absolute worst. They're often found near the end of levels and dish out insane amounts of damage, while also being huge and having a buttload of HP. It usually just feels like luck of the draw whether you can even beat them or not, as their movement patterns are extremely erratic. Though there are definitely methods to take care of them if you've got the right tools. When defeating enemies, they will occasionally drop items. You'll also sometimes find items in secret areas, or just randomly lying on the floor. These items are what helps keep you going. There are the life and weapon energies, both coming in 2 sizes, that will restore your health and current sub-weapon ammo respectively. These are always a pleasure to come across, especially life energies, unless you already have full health, I guess. If you're lucky, you could also find an extra life, which, as you would expect, will give you an extra life. Not much to say there, I guess. And finally, we have the score balls, which will increase your score, because yes, that is something that is for some reason in this game. To be fair, back then, practically every game had a score system similar to this. For as completely redundant as it always was, it's really annoying when you want to get some life energy, but the enemies just keep dropping score balls. Again, it was standard for the time, but that still doesn't mean I like it. What I do like, however, is the music. Mega Man 1 has a pretty darn decent soundtrack. It's far from incredible. The tracks themselves are all very simplistic and not especially the catchiest or most atmospheric out there, but they're all definitely at the very least pleasant and help give the game its identity. Good stuff we've got here. The level design in these Robot Master stages is not much to write home about, though we do have some interesting ideas from time to time. Each of these stages revolve around a few specific enemies and set pieces, with some of the more infamous ones being the lifts at the beginning of Gotsman's stage, as well as the disappearing blocks from Iceman's and the Lackman stages. These all require you to pull off some devilishly precise jumps, with the disappearing blocks especially needing some cool-ass memorization and timing. But you see, I run into a bit of a personal issue here. Mega Man 1 is a game I have played countless times. It is easily in the double digits. and due to that fact, critiquing the difficulty of many of these sections is pretty tough for me. I have already mastered all of this long ago, so as expected, I didn't really have that much of a hard time going through this game at all. Still, I can concede that Mega Man 1 is a pretty difficult game. It's more so that it could be pretty easily broken if you know what to do. If you are having trouble, however, then the Robot Master weapons are here to help you out. Well, kinda. The special weapon selection in Mega Man 1, I feel, is a pretty mixed bag. We have some weapons like the Thunder Beam and Firestorm, which are greatly useful in combat, as they are both just straight up better than the Mega Buster, with the Thunder Beam shooting in multiple directions, and Firestorm giving you a temporary shield which destroys most small enemies. We also have stuff like the Ice Slasher and Rolling Cutter, both decently solid weapons that suffer from being pretty situationally useful, with the Ice Slasher only really being useful against the aforementioned big guys, as it just freezes enemies instead of damaging them, and Rolling Cutter basically just being a worse version of the Thunder Beam. But then we get to the bottom of the barrel of Mega Man 1's weapon arsenal, the Super Arm and the Hyper Bomb. Both of these weapons are straight up garbage. The Super Arm is only ever used to pick up a few boulders, and said boulders can be destroyed with the Thunder Beam anyways, and the Hyper Bomb is just a slow projectile that takes way too long to detonate, making using it more of a hassle than anything. Most of the time when I play Mega Man 1, I basically just exclusively use the Firestorm and Thunder Beam, and while I did try to vary it up this time around, I can still confidently say that outside of bosses, those are really the only two weapons you'll ever need. There is actually one final weapon that serves more so as a utility upgrade, the Magnet Beam. It's found in a Lackman stage and requires the use of the Super Arm in order to be obtained, which is strange considering that later on, the game actually straight up requires you to use the Magnet Beam, so having it be so easily missable is definitely perplexing. But at the very least, the Magnet Beam itself is pretty damn awesome, allowing you to shoot out bridges for Mega Man to cross. You can use this to straight up skip a bunch of platforming sections, and it always feels awesome when you pull it off. But with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the Robot Masters themselves, and this is another area where Mega Man 1 suffers a bit. Ideally, you'd want each of the starting bosses to be about as equally strong as one another. However, that isn't really the case here. Bosses like Hotman, Bombman, and Gutsman are all pretty easy with just the vanilla Buster, and these are all definitely pretty solid boss battles. My favorite starting choice was always Bombman, mostly just for how much of a complete pushover he is. I feel Gutsman relies a little bit too much on RNG, but I do like the challenge with needing to make sure Mega Man is above ground when Gutsman lands on it, or else he'll be stunned by his sheer might. And Gutsman is kinda just an all-around solid simple boss fight, not much to say about him. The balancing issues more so lie with the Lackman, Iceman and Fireman. Iceman himself isn't too difficult as his patterns are pretty predictable. However, Iceman's stage is by far the toughest of the starting 6, with all of its disappearing blocks, strict platforming, and ice physics. Just in case you thought the movement wasn't slippery enough. You'll definitely want to at least have the Magnet Beam when getting here. Lackman and Fireman are both actual garbage though. Fireman just completely barrages you with attacks non-stop, making it damn near impossible to kill him without getting hit. But at the very least, his attacks don't dish out that much damage, meaning you could just spam through his battle and possibly win. The same can sadly not be said for a Lackman, by far the hardest boss in the game without weaknesses. He runs faster than you, has more defense than you, and attacks for a lot more damage than you. For this playthrough, I wanted to beat all of the bosses with only the Mega Buster, and it took me over half an hour to beat this asshole. If the only reasonable way to win a boss battle is to manipulate the RNG, then I think it's fair to say that the boss itself is not particularly well designed, which here in the game analysis space is a synonym for shit. All of these issues only really apply if you're using the Mega Buster though. With weaknesses, all of these guys are complete pushovers, and you can pretty easily find what those weaknesses are with a simple Google search. Though I will be fair and give the game credit in this regard, the weaknesses here all make logical sense. It's not just completely random like is often the case with the later installments. The Firestorm beats Bombman because fire can fuse bombs, the Guts Arm lets you throw boulders at Cotman, and as we all know, Rock beats Scissors. Stuff like that applies to all of the Robot Masters, and it is pretty darn neat. Most Mega Man games have a recommended boss order that will land you the easiest possible time, and if you want to go even further, you could also use something like the pause glitch. Pressing select pauses the game without bringing up the weapons menu. However, during this pause period, the invincibility frames of enemies won't be paused, letting you basically one-shot everything with the Thunder Beam. And that is just one of the many ways to completely break this game, but I believe you already get my point. After defeating all 6 Robot Masters, Wily shows up in his UFO, hitches you for a ride, and the gates will open towards the final act, Dr. Wily's robot manufacturing plant. This area is comprised of 4 different stages. Your special weapons energy won't refill between levels, but if you get a game over at any point, you still only go back to the beginning of the stage you died on, and get all of your weapon energy refilled. So basically, if you wanna, just get a game over after starting every new level. The cool thing about this part of the game is that it mixes in a lot of gimmicks and set pieces from the previous Robot Master stages, creating this sort of test of everything you learned on your 25-minute long journey. The game allows itself to get a lot harder at this point, as it's designed with you already having all of the weapons in mind. The magnet beam thing is still stupid, but how well. I also always really enjoyed the music in this section. While the rest of the game is mostly pretty light-hearted, this is where things get a bit more serious, with music that is legitimately pretty melancholic and intimidating. These stages of course all have bosses, with said bosses all having their own weaknesses. The first Wily stage closes off with what is by far the most infamous boss in the game, the Yellow Devil. This creepy yellow gooey moss that splits itself apart to barrage you with chunks of its body. The Yellow Devil's pattern is always consistent, so again, while brutally overwhelming at first, it can be taken down without too much trouble after some practice. The only real issue then is that it takes freaking ages to kill it. Other bosses such as the Copy Robot and CWU/01P seem intimidating, but can be exploited and dispatched rather easily. Honestly, the part I always found to be the hardest was not even the final boss itself, but rather the boss gauntlet before it. You have to face Bombman, Fireman, Iceman, and Gutsman, all in rapid succession, and without any healing items in between, which, as you would expect, is very much not an easy thing to do. Weirdly enough, the game has you rematching Cotman and the Lekman in Wily Stage 2, with the rest of the Robot Masters being right at the end of Stage 4, which is another one of the strange design quirks in Mega Man 1. I know a lot of people really hate the boss rematches, as it's pretty obviously just padding, and while I would agree that I am very much not a fan of them, in this first game, bleh, I don't really mind it. If you use weaknesses, all of these bosses die in like 4 hits anyways. Before facing off against the 4 Robot Masters in the final stage, you can actually get the elusive Yashichi, which will fully restore your health and the ammo of all of your weapons, allowing you to be fully ready for the gauntlet that lies ahead. After taking care of that though, Dr. Wily himself is kind of a pushover. He has 2 phases, and both of them have patterns that are pretty damn easy to learn and exploit. The Yellow Devil and even the Copy Robot were both way harder than this. The battle itself is still an enjoyable one, even if a bit of an anticlimax. But with that, Mega Man has defeated Dr. Wily, who has nothing left to do but beg for forgiveness, showing us just how pathetic it truly is. And of course, Mega Man, being the pure soul that we know, allows Wily to live another day, hoping he could learn from his errors and never do anything bad ever again. And that was Mega Man 1. I know I don't talk about that sort of stuff much, but I was always a fan of this credit sequence. Mega Man taking a stroll back to Dr. Light's lab. It's a cool set piece, even if I do really hate Mega Man's hairdo in this first game. It is so freaking plasticky, though I guess that would make sense considering that he's a robot, huh? well, this is where the game ends, so it's not like I have to question it any further. So yeah, Mega Man 1, overall I still really enjoy this game. It definitely has a lot of clunkiness. The movement isn't great, bosses and weapons unbalanced, and graphics subpar. Without a doubt, this is a very flawed installment. Yet regardless of that, I still think that at its core, it is still a greatly enjoyable game. And with how many Mega Man games are out there, this one being sorta weird and clunky kinda adds to its charm for me. It is definitely not for everyone, even if I do think that it aged far better than most other NES games. You're probably better off starting this series with a different title, but after you've already gotten acquainted with the series, I think the original game is still worth giving a shot even nowadays. Next time we'll be looking at Mega Man, it will be with the game that truly jumped the series into the stratosphere, Mega Man 2, also for the NES. I'm a pretty small channel, so if you could like this video, share it around, and subscribe to the channel, you have no idea how much that would help me out, both physically and mentally. Subscribing helps getting these videos out to more people, so if you enjoyed the video, please support the channel in any way you can. So with that said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you all next time. Have a good one.